When my son handed me eviction papers at dinner, I smiled and destroyed his world. Margaret's voice, steady but edged with emotion. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Before I begin today's story, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved more than life itself, hit that like button right now. And if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when the world tries to break you down, subscribe and turn on those notifications. Also, drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from. I love knowing I'm not alone in this world, and I read every single comment. Now let me tell you about the night my son handed me eviction papers at our New Year's dinner, and how I made sure he'd never forget what happens when you underestimate your mother. My name is Margaret, and I'm 66 years old. I've lived through things that would break most people. I buried a husband I loved with every fiber of my being. I worked 3 jobs to put my son Charles through college when his father died and left us with nothing but debt and grief. I gave that boy everything. My youth, my health, my savings, my entire heart. And on New Year's night, while we sat at the mahogany dining table that I'd polished every week for 40 years, he slid a manila envelope across the linen tablecloth toward me like I was some kind of stranger, some tenant who'd overstayed their welcome. The candles I'd lit for our celebration flickered between us, and I remember thinking how appropriate it was that the light seemed to dim right at that moment. "What's this, sweetheart?" I asked, still smiling because I didn't understand yet. I was still innocent to what my own child had become. Charles didn't even look at me when he answered. He just cut into his prime rib, the roast I'd spent 4 hours preparing, the one I'd used my Social Security money to buy because I wanted our first dinner of the new year to be special. "It's time you left, Mother," he said, his voice cold as January ice. "Those are eviction papers. Legally, I'm giving you 30 days to vacate my property." My property. Those words echoed in my skull like a death knell. I sat there, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, and the room started spinning. This house, every brick, every nail, every memory soaked into these walls. I'd paid for all of it. Yes, 5 years ago, when Charles convinced me he needed the house in his name for tax purposes, I'd signed it over. He'd held my hand and promised me it was just paperwork, that nothing would change, that this was my home until the day I died. He'd looked me in the eyes, my baby boy, and sworn on his father's grave that he was just trying to help me with estate planning. I should have known better. I should have seen what he'd become. Charles had married a woman named Vivian 2 years earlier, a sleek, cold creature who looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her Louboutin heels. She sat beside him that night, her lips curved in the smallest smile of satisfaction, her manicured nails drumming against her wine glass. I realized in that horrible moment that this had been her idea. She wanted my house. She wanted to renovate it, turn it into one of those modern monstrosities you see in magazines, all glass and chrome and absolutely no soul. And my son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep every night after his father died, the child I'd read stories to and bandaged scraped knees for and believed in when he failed his college entrance exams the first time. He'd chosen her over me. But here's what Charles didn't know about his mother. I didn't raise a fool, and I sure as hell wasn't one myself. When you grow up poor like I did, when you survive a husband's death and raise a child alone and work yourself to the bone year after year, you learn things. You learn to be smart. You learn to protect yourself. And you learn that money isn't just paper. It's power, it's leverage. It's the difference between being someone's victim and being someone who fights back. So I did something that night that I'm not ashamed of, not for one single second. I looked at my son, at this stranger wearing my child's face, and I smiled. A real smile. "Okay, Charles," I said softly. "That's what you want." Then I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. I ate every bite of that prime rib. I savored the roasted potatoes I'd made with rosemary from the garden his father planted. I drank my wine slowly, letting each sip warm my throat. And with every bite, with every swallow I planned. Vivian looked confused by my calm. Charles looked almost disappointed, like he'd wanted me to cry or beg, or make a scene that would justify what he was doing. But I gave them nothing. When dinner was over, I cleared the table like I always did, washed the dishes by hand, dried them and put them away. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom, sat on the bed my husband died in, and made a series of phone calls that would change everything. You see, over the years I'd been careful. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was the wisdom that comes from being kicked around by life enough times that you stop trusting anyone completely. When I signed that house over to Charles, I kept certain things in my name. Not because I didn't trust him at the time, God, I wish I could say I'd been that smart, but because my financial advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd helped me navigate my husband's death, insisted on it. She'd said something I never forgot. Margaret, keep some cards in your own hand. Always. So I had. I had credit cards in my name that Charles used, cards I'd given him years ago for emergencies that somehow became his daily spending tools. I had the bank account that his direct deposit went into, the one we'd set up when he was in college and just never changed. I had the investment account my husband left me, the one that had grown over 25 years into a substantial nest egg, and Charles was the beneficiary. I had access to everything because I was his mother, and he'd never bothered to protect himself from me because why would he? I was just his harmless old mother, wasn't I? That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my computer, the one Charles made fun of me for barely knowing how to use, and I worked. I called the credit card companies one by one. I was so polite, so sweet. Exactly the kind of confused elderly woman they expected. Hello, yes, I'm worried my cards might have been compromised. I'd like to freeze my accounts, please. Click, click, click. 6 credit cards, all frozen. Cards that Charles used for everything. His morning coffee, his gas, his client lunches, the expensive dinners he took Vivian to, the designer clothes she wore, the country club membership fees. All frozen. Then I called the bank when they opened early the next morning. I'd like to move my money to a different institution, I said. The money in that checking account, the one his paycheck went into, I transferred every penny to a new account at a different bank, one he didn't know about. I changed my passwords, my security questions, everything. I called my investment advisor and updated my beneficiary from Charles to a charity I'd always supported. 40 years of careful saving, gone from his future in a single phone call. When the sun rose on New Year's Day, I was still awake, but I was ready. I made myself a cup of coffee and waited. I knew exactly when Charles would discover what I'd done. He was a creature of habit, my son. Every morning he stopped at that boutique coffee shop downtown, the one where a single cup cost $8. And every morning he paid with the credit card that was in my name. I heard the scream from upstairs even though he was across town. Well, I didn't literally hear it, but I felt it in my bones when my phone started ringing at 7:43 a.m. I let it ring. It rang 17 times before going to voicemail. Then it started again. And again. I sipped my coffee and watched my phone light up with call after call, text after text. The messages were pure rage. How dare I? What had I done? Did I understand what I was doing? Fix this immediately. On and on, like I was the one who'd wronged him. When he finally came home, and yes, I still thought of it as my home despite what those papers said, he burst through the door like a hurricane. His face was purple with fury, veins throbbing in his neck, spit flying from his mouth as he screamed at me. The card had been declined at the coffee shop, then at the gas station, then when he tried to pay for breakfast with a client. He'd been humiliated, embarrassed in front of someone important. How could I do this to him? Didn't I understand he had responsibilities, a reputation, a life? I let him scream himself hoarse. I sat in my armchair, the one I'd rocked him in when he was a baby, and I waited until he ran out of steam. Then, in a voice so calm it frightened even me, I said, "You handed me eviction papers at dinner, Charles. You told me I had 30 days to leave the home I paid for, the home where your father died, the home where I raised you. Did you think I would just accept that? Did you think I'd make it easy for you?" The look on his face was almost worth everything I'd been through. Almost. "This is different," he sputtered. "That's business. You're sabotaging my life." I laughed then. I actually laughed and it felt good, like poison leaving my body. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm teaching you a lesson your father and I apparently failed to teach you. Actions have consequences. You want me out of this house? Fine. But you're going to learn what it costs to betray the person who gave you everything." Over the next few weeks, I watched my son's perfect life start to crumble. Without access to those credit cards, without the cushion of the money in our joint account, he and Vivian had to actually live on just his salary. And it turned out that salary didn't stretch as far as they thought when you had a mortgage payment, car payments on 2 luxury vehicles, country club fees, and Vivian's shopping addiction to support. The arguments I could hear through the walls. Oh, they were spectacular. Vivian had married a man she thought was financially secure. and she was discovering that he'd been living on his mother's money like a parasite for years. I could have ended it. I could have unfrozen the cards, given him access to money, made it all go away. Part of me, the part that still remembered nursing him through fevers and cheering at his soccer games, wanted to. But every time I weakened, I looked at those eviction papers still sitting on my dresser, and I remembered the coldness in his voice when he told me it was time to leave. I remembered Vivian's satisfied smile, and I stayed strong. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Charles came to me, and this time he wasn't angry. He was broken. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped, and for the first time since he'd married Vivian, he looked like my son again instead of a stranger. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked. "Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Vivian, she convinced me that we needed space, that having you here was holding us back from building our life, and I listened to her instead of listening to my heart. Please forgive me." I wanted to cave. God, how I wanted to take him in my arms and fix everything like I'd always done. But I'd learned something important over those 3 weeks. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I'd learned that I deserved better than being thrown away like trash. And I'd learned that sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is let them face the consequences of their choices. "Charles," I said carefully, "I will unfreeze the cards. I will give you access to the money in the account. But I have conditions." His face lit up with desperate hope, and I hated that I was about to crush some of it. "First, those eviction papers get torn up, and you sign this house back to me legally and permanently. Second," Vivian goes, "I'm sorry, but I can't live under the same roof with someone who would convince you to throw your mother out. Third, you start therapy. Real therapy, to figure out how you became the kind of man who could do what you did. And fourth, you earn back my trust, which means no more access to my accounts, my credit, or my money beyond what I choose to give you as gifts. You're almost 40 years old, Charles. It's time you stood on your own feet." The next part of this story isn't dramatic or satisfying in the way you might expect. Charles didn't immediately agree. In fact, he left angry again, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. But desperation is a powerful teacher. When the mortgage payment came due and he couldn't make it, when Vivian started talking about divorce if he couldn't maintain the lifestyle she required, when he realized that his comfortable life had been built on a foundation of his mother's sacrifice and generosity, that's when he came back. It took 2 months, but he signed the house back to me. He filed for divorce from Vivian, and I'd love to say I felt triumphant about that, but mostly I just felt sad for both of them. He started therapy, and slowly, painfully, my real son started to emerge from underneath the layers of entitlement and selfishness that had crusted over him. We started having dinner together again, but this time there was honesty between us. He told me how lost he'd felt after his father died, how he'd spent his whole life trying to live up to a ghost, how he'd let Vivian convince him that strength meant pushing away anyone who reminded him of his pain. And I told him how betrayed I'd felt, how scared I'd been facing homelessness at 66, and how close I'd come to giving up entirely. Now 6 months later, we're rebuilding something new. It's not the relationship we had before. That's gone forever, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it needed to die so something healthier could grow in its place. Charles lives in an apartment now, one he pays for with his own money. He comes over for Sunday dinners, and he brings groceries that he pays for himself. He's learning to budget, to sacrifice, to understand what I did for him all those years. And sometimes when I catch him looking around this house with real appreciation instead of entitled assumption, I see a glimmer of the man I always hoped he'd become. As for me, I'm still here in my house, with my name on the deed locked in a safe deposit box that only I can access. I've got my credit cards in my wallet, my money in my accounts, and my dignity intact. I learned that I'm not just someone's mother or someone's widow. I'm Margaret, and I'm a survivor, and I'm not to be trifled with. Did I go too far? Some people might say yes. Some might say a mother should forgive everything, accept anything, sacrifice endlessly. But I'm done with that version of motherhood. Love doesn't mean being a doormat. Love doesn't mean accepting betrayal with a smile. Real love, the kind that actually helps people grow, sometimes means letting them fall so they can learn to pick themselves up. So that's my story. That's what happened when my son handed me eviction papers at New Year's dinner. And I smiled and quietly destroyed the comfortable life he'd built on my back. Do I regret it? Not for a second. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Because at the end of the day, I taught my son the most important lesson of his life. Never underestimate the woman who raised you, especially when you've given her every reason to fight back. Before I go, remember to hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real stories about standing up for yourself when life knocks you down. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and whether you think I did the right thing. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you're going through something similar, if someone you love has betrayed your trust, and you're wondering whether you're strong enough to stand up for yourself, let me tell you something. You are. You're stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and you deserve better than being treated like you don't matter. This is Margaret signing off. Remember, being kind doesn't mean being weak, and setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. It makes you wise. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next video.